Okay, I'm assuming that you've had enough time to read them. So then what I did for my step 2 is I took a look at, especially like that NBT 2, where it said read and write multi-digit whole numbers using base 10 numerals, number names, and expanded form. So like there's a lot of stuff right within that one sentence that I felt like I had to flesh out of there a little bit, right? Like I felt like that those were each going to be different types of questions that I was going to ask on my assessment. So when then you look down, my learning targets aren't in any kind of fancy language. In fact, I didn't feel like these particular 4 standards really lended themselves real well to actually changing much at all. So the first standard, I just actually left as it is. But that second one, I broke into many different pieces parts because I have the read the whole numbers in all of the different ways that they wanted to be able to read them. And then I had the write, them writing the whole numbers in all the different ways that they needed to write them. So that's standard. And then that was just the first part of that standard. Then the second sentence of that compared to multi-digit numbers based on blah, blah, blah. So then that became its own learning target at the bottom. So that one standard ended up being a pretty big chunk of the learning targets for my assessment. And then the last 2 actually ended up staying the way that they were. Now, I had trouble, the NBT4 was pretty easy because it says fluently add and subtract. So that tells me that this is using the standard algorithm. So that tells me that there's really only going to be one way to assess that standard is telling me that in 4th grade, I'm going to put what I call naked numbers on an assessment and see if kids can add and subtract them. That standard tells me that. But I wasn't sure about NBT3 and NBT1, exactly what it was that they were looking for. So then I went to a different resource. I went to Illustrative Mathematics, and I took a look at, because I'm not some sort of ninja that can read these standards and exactly know. So this is another great resource for the math folks in the world. But I came here and I said, all right, I want to take a look at these standards and I want to know more about what the expectation is around those. So then what I did here is I went to, and I know this is tiny, Laura already yelled at me to make this bigger so you can see it. So then I came here and I clicked on these illustrations for these different standards, and that helped me understand that, nope, these are actually going to be assessed in a pretty straightforward way as well. So that was kind of the thinking that I did to leave the learning targets in very similar language than the standards. But it also helped me fill out the next section, which we'll do in a minute, which is the grid to the right on this task. Yes?
I'm so sorry. I have a question.
No need to apologize.
When you do a blueprint, are you doing a blueprint on an assessment or on a performance test right now?
On a full assessment. So this is on like a full, this is my unit that I've just taught, and now I'm going to be thinking about the assessment that I'm going to give. And so I've got to figure out what is the best way for me to create an assessment that measures what I need it to measure from what I just taught.
Could you define the unit? So you said the unit you just taught, which is defined as?
A group of standards that I've brought together that I think instructionally makes sense for how the standards are written. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Just I'm not thinking about this the whole time.
Yes.
It might have been the last time I wasn't at the last training, but wouldn't it be good to have some of the depth of knowledge and strategic and extended as well, or does it just depend on the assessment type?
No, that's a great question. So then I think that the standards will dictate that in a way. So when I look at these standards, see how they all ended up basically in this recall section, because it's reading and writing numbers, it's fluently using an algorithm. So I apparently picked a pretty lame unit, even though I just went to 4th grade and picked the very first unit. But this one didn't really lend itself to that. I happened to pick a unit that had a lot of very straightforward math in it. So I'm not going to try to tease out some sort of performance task here where it doesn't seem to really fit with what my learning targets are telling me.
Okay, so like basic calculation, there's no need to go beyond it. It's not asking for
No, there's going to be enough in fourth grade in particular, and this is, I think, when you have like a better sense of your grade level. But like fourth grade, there's going to be some pretty nasty work that the kids are going to have to do with decimals and fractions in this grade. So right, like you can let the whole numbers live how the whole numbers live, because really the whole numbers is at the end of the learning trajectory for them.
Just the beginning of the year.
Yes, yeah. Yep, and so you're going to be setting routines in your classroom and all sorts of stuff. So, and I guess the moral of that is you're going to know the content that you have to teach for your grade level, and you have to live not in the theoretical world, but in the real world, where I'm not going to have time every single assessment that I give to give these very extensive performance tasks. You're going to have to be like intentional about where you place those. And if you've got an assessment like this and a unit like this that you're probably going to be able to get through quicker, then do that, because then you're going to afford yourself more time later for the nasty work with fractions and decimals that might come up later. Yep. Someone else had their, yeah.
We were just talking, in English, it seems like our assessments are more performance tasks and not an actual like assessment with different item types. Like we would have maybe a vocabulary over here, like grammar, but then if we're doing the literature, so would this be more for like an exam that we would use? Because we're not going to have different item types necessarily, or we use it just primarily for that grammar assessment.
Well, grammar is the math of English class, right? So when you have those grammar pieces, those are probably going to be where you land for a lot of your selected response, very basic type of, do they understand what a misplaced modifier is or don't they? But then you're probably right. On most of your exams, it's going to be different, where it's going to be a lot of constructed response. So, but I think that there's probably going to be an ebb and a flow with yours, maybe in a different way than there is in math, but I still think that that's going to be there, where you're going to have some assessments that you give that are going to be pretty long and beefy and scary, whereas there might be other things, depending upon how you embed the grammar with your writing. If you do, or if it stands alone, I don't know that, but when you get to those pieces, those are probably going to be quicker, more straightforward type assessments.
Well, we're doing like school-wide, we're moving more toward incorporating it, like Kelly Gallagher, and with the writing.
Yep.
And so when we were preparing for today, we were talking about that. I don't have formal grammar tests anymore because it's more of a weekly quiz, and you're doing it in the writing. So what we were talking about is, do you create then the focus grammar areas on a paper? You know, so it works in conjunction with the performance test, but you're
Yeah.
also looking at the grammar standards. It just doesn't look like a multiple choice.
No, and it doesn't have to. And I think, and Mark, please step in, because this is a little bit out of my realm, but I think that in the Smarter Balance stuff that I've seen for ELA, there are still selected response type options there, and they're in the realm of grammar, but it lives in a which sentence might you choose, or which one has the right comma. So they can do that because they give the test on a computer, but that may or may not look different for you, because you're probably going to give most of your assessments on a paper pencil. And so, you know, they call it selected response because they have 4 options with the comma in a different place each time, whereas you might just have them place the comma. So it might not feel selected response, but in a way I still think that fits more so in a selected response realm than it does in a constructed response realm, if that makes sense. Is that okay? Other questions? I thought someone at that table, but I must be wrong. So Mark's going to kind of walk through what he did with the